The Shepnaz podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm your host today. And this past Sunday, Pastor Rob was back in the pulpit or the saddle or whatever metaphor you want to use there. Giving his message. And this week, the message was the finest hours. And we got a little bit of some video clips that we went through and made some correlations. So we're going to dive a little deeper into that today. So welcome in, Pastor Rob.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. So Sunday was a little bit different. We in the past have done some sermon series in the summer, using movies and how to find faith in film and everything. And I really have felt like the Lord has laid on my heart for us to, really just kind of dive in and drill down on some evangelism stuff. We had the class earlier this summer. We're going to do a series on that. But I wanted to use some movie clips from this movie, The Finest Hours, because there's some incredible analogies that come from this movie to our faith and sharing our faith. And as I said, the movie is called The Finest Hours, The Finest Hours, and it chronicles the greatest boat rescue in the United States Coast Guard history. So it's totally true story. And it chronicles the story of four guys who volunteered to go out on this mission to save the crew of the U.S. or the SS Pendleton, which was a tanker. And it was this gigantic ship, and it was caught in a storm. And the storm is said to have had 60-foot waves. Wow. And this tanker literally broke in half like a toy. There was some crew on one side of the tanker that died in the storm because that sunk immediately. But there was 28 guys who were left on one side of the ship that did not sink, and they were just
bobbing in
in a storm off the coast of Massachusetts. This was in 1952 in February, so it's freezing cold. It's a snowstorm, like a blizzard.
Wow.
And again, 60-foot waves. And so the movie starts off with this, kind of tells the story of these guys and sets it all up. But then the tanker, which is a 500-foot tanker, splits in two. The Coast Guard hears about this, and there's an officer in charge. And this officer in charge is responsible for deciding how the rescue operation is going to take place. He knows it's a suicide mission. When a 500-foot tanker splits in half like a toy, what are you going to send out to rescue these guys? But he knew he had to do something. And so he kind of asked, there's a guy, he says, I'll do it. And then, the guy in charge is like, I don't even feel like I can command anybody to do this or order someone to do this. And so there were three guys who stepped up, knowing it was a suicide mission. And so the officer in charge says, okay, the guy who was in charge of the rescue mission, his name was Bernie Weber. They have a very thick Boston, Massachusetts. It's Weber in the movie, but his name is Weber. And he says, go out. And there are other guys in the office there when the commanding officer tells these guys to go out. And they're like Bernie, this is a suicide mission. You can't do this. And they're like, why don't you just take the boat out and just kind of drive around the harbor, say you couldn't get out. And
kind of pretend like you're doing something, but
act
not
like you
really.
did, and then come back and say we couldn't make it.
Yeah.
And there's this line in there that Bernie Weber says, and he goes, there's a Coast Guard saying, and everybody who has ever worked in the Coast Guard knows this, and the saying is, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. And so while these guys are trying to encourage Bernie to not really go, Bernie's motivated by this. It's actually in the Regulations of the Life-Saving Service of 1899, Article 6, Action at Wrecks, Section 252, page 58, and it says, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. And that motivates Bernie to go out. And so they go out. And I was thinking about how this regulation that the Coast Guard has places the highest value on the life of those who are in need of rescue.
Right.
Like it literally says that those who are in need of rescue are even more important than the life of the rescuer. You have to go. You have to try. Nothing else mattered when the word comes that people are in need of rescue. Those who are in need of rescue, it's the number one priority of the Coast Guard. And I was thinking about how Jesus did the very same thing for us. Like he made those who need rescue the church's highest priority. Like the last thing that Jesus said while he was here physically on this earth was he gave the Great Commission, and then he ascended back to heaven. And the Great Commission is go.
Right.
You know, you have to go. And he says, go into all the world and preach the good news. He says, you have to do this. And then in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10, 11, Paul says this, that he, referring to Christ, rescued us from certain doom, and he'll do it again, rescuing us as many times as we need rescuing. You and your prayers are part of the rescue operation. And I just felt like it was really powerful moment to see an organization that exists to rescue people, and their motivation is you have to go because people who need rescued their life is more important than you. And I felt like that just parallels the church so much.
Yeah.
That is our mission. Our mission, there's nothing else that we exist for is more important than the life of a person who doesn't know Jesus that needs to be rescued from their sin. They may not even know it, but we know it, and we need to make that our highest priority. And so then there's another scene in this movie where, you know, the ship's been split in half. The crew has just finished praying for those on the other half of the ship that have they've lost their lives. And there's a guy on there who has a radio, and he's trying to make contact with land.
Sure.
And the storm is making it very hard. And finally, he gets a signal, and when he listens to this signal, he realizes that somebody else is talking to base, and it's another giant T2 tanker, another 500-foot tanker had been split in half as well.
Oh, wow.
And the guys are like, oh my gosh, this has happened to another tanker. And no one is hearing the message of these guys, but they're hearing the message of the other tanker. And the guy literally says, if they know that other tanker, they're going to go rescue them. And who's going to come for us?
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, finally you make contact, and you're like, I'm gonna, we've made contact, but it's somebody else's rescue story. And they're sitting there, they're totally helpless, right? There's absolutely nothing these guys can do. The ship is totally disabled. The part with the engine sunk. It's not like you can get a paddle and paddle a 250-foot tanker with paddles in a storm with 60-foot waves. They're totally dependent upon somebody else to come and rescue them. And I was thinking about how that parallels the life of people who don't know Jesus, that there's nothing they can do for themselves, right? Like you can't earn your salvation. You can't be good enough. You can't do enough of this or that or whatever. They're totally dependent upon someone else to come and rescue them. And I would never discount the role of the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit plays a vital role in the salvation experience of another person. But all throughout history, God has almost always used other people. It's other people who have gone, who've been the mouthpiece for Jesus, or who have talked to them and helped them to see the truth or to share the gospel with them. And if we don't go, we don't tell them, and we're not the ones to help them, who's going to help them?
Right.
Like, who's going to go? And then I think about also that when an effort is made to rescue someone, there's always challenges to overcome, right? There's always these challenges. Every rescue operation, the Coast Guard has challenges. There's obstacles. And if it didn't, there wouldn't be any need of rescue. People would just rescue themselves, right? But there was a specific obstacle in this particular rescue operation that was massive. And the obstacle that the Coast Guard faced in this terrible storm was to get over the bar, or that's what they called it in the movie, but it's a shoal, S-H-O-A-L. And if you're not familiar with what a shoal is, I actually learned about that this week because I was down in North Carolina myself, and I was fishing. But a shoal is a natural submerged ridge or a bank or a bar that rises up from the bed of a body of water to near the surface that constitutes a danger to navigation. So you can't necessarily see it because it's under the water, but it's so high that if you were to drive a boat over it, the boat could hit the land.
Right.
It could knock a hole in the hull, or the boat could get stuck or whatever. And so this week I was down in North Carolina fishing with a guy, and I have a great story to tell you about this guy sometime. But anyway, we were shore fishing on the beach.
Yeah.
And we're throwing out there, and he's like, "You got to throw it over the bar out there." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I don't see a bar." He goes, "There's a bar out there." And so basically, like, when we're standing on the beach, there was the water that was the waves that were coming up on the beach. And then out about 30 or 40 yards, there was a bar, and you could see the waves breaking on it. And so I learned this from this guy. He's like, "Yeah, see where the waves are breaking out there? They're not breaking here. They're breaking out there. That's because there's a bar out there, and that means the sand is up high. And so the waves think that it's actually hitting the beach, but it's not. And then it goes into this, it goes over the bar, and then it comes back up again." And we were catching fish in between the bar and the beach. And he goes, "But the good fish are on the other side of the bar.
Yeah.
So you got to cast out there." And so we literally walked out into the water to cast on the other side of the bar. I couldn't see it.
Right.
But then eventually he's like, "See where it kind of smooths out a little bit? Like the water just gets real smooth, or the waves hit it and then it gets smooth. That's the bar." And then the tide went down enough that I could actually see it. Well, in this particular movie, there's a bar off the coast of Massachusetts that's a good ways out there, but ships have to go way around it, or they have to wait till the tide is high.
Right.
And so when the tide is high, they can go over it, but they have their navigation equipment and all that kind of stuff. But there's a storm, and there's 60-foot waves. So imagine what the sea looks like when the waves go up 60 feet, but then they come down, right? And they're coming down far also. And so the bar is getting exposed. These guys were this was 1952. They didn't have the navigation equipment we do today. They actually had a magnetic compass. That's all he had, and a couple of lights on the ship. And he's like, they got to get over the bar. So this was this rescue story. And before they could even get to the people that needed rescue, they had to overcome this obstacle. And so the guys on the boat are looking at each other like, "We're going to die before we get to the guys that need rescued." And Bernie's like, "We got to try." And so they couldn't see it, but they knew because of their time in the water where it was. And he's like, "We got to time this just right. So we got to hit it when the wave is coming up." And so he had to start the engine way back to get enough momentum to hit the wave, for the wave to take them over the bar. Yeah. The problem is when you're riding a wave, it always comes down.
You're coming down at some point.
And so in that process, they made it over the bar, but they were just slammed down to the water, and in that process, with the 60-foot wave coming back down on top of them, they lost their compass, which was the only thing they had to navigate.
Wow.
So now they're on the other side of the bar, but they don't have a compass. And I was thinking about the similarity of how, in our attempt to rescue other people spiritually, we face obstacles all the time. I mean, there's obstacles that there's spiritual warfare, right? I mean, the Bible even says that our struggle is not really against people or people with flesh and blood, but it's against rulers, authorities, against powers of this dark world. So there's a spiritual war that we have. And so in order for us to even have the opportunity to rescue other people, we have to overcome this obstacle of spiritual warfare. But then we also have our own obstacles, right? I mean, you think about people when you ask, say, well, why don't we share our faith more with other people? Well, one of them is maybe I'm afraid. I have fear.
Right.
Like I don't know what to say to people. I don't know how to say it. I don't want to sound like a stupid person when I start talking about them, or what are people going to think about me when I start telling them that I'm a Christian and I'm trusting Jesus for my salvation, and that if you don't know Jesus, you're going to spend eternity separated from him. It's like, are people going to think that I'm a weird or whatever? And then are they going to reject me? Are they going to say things about me? Or am I going to lose a relationship with somebody that I really care about? And so we have this fear. And I was thinking about how when these guys are trying to rescue these guys who definitely need rescued, who are totally 100% dependent upon somebody to come and rescue them, they had to overcome this obstacle. We have to do the same thing. We have to overcome this fear. And then we have excuses like, well, I don't have the time, or they have plenty of time, right? Like it's gonna be fine. That somebody else will do it. They have plenty of time. But those are all obstacles that we have to overcome.
When you were describing that, I was going back to that first scene that you were describing when some of the other sailors were saying, just go out in the harbor and kind of go around a little bit and then come back and say you couldn't go out. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes as believers, we're on shore at church and we hear the sermon and you're challenging people, go out and share your faith, and some people are like, let's just go out in the harbor and just kind of mill around for a little bit and then we'll come back and say we tried. And
that's really good.
we have to actually go across that bar, which means getting past your comfort zone, getting past your fears, and to say, okay, I will accept the fact that since I already know Christ, that anything that I may suffer here is less than what they'll suffer
for eternity.
Right. So like if I'm going to suffer some ridicule, or if I'm going to suffer some uncomfortableness, or whatever it is that I fear that I might suffer for going out there and actually sharing my faith, I have to accept before I even go out that what I might suffer is less than what they're going to suffer if I don't try this. Yeah. So
that's good.
It definitely, my head was right there with you as you were describing that scene.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast. As I said last week, I went down to North Carolina, so I had 8-hour drive or 9-hour drive, and I was listening to a podcast. And another pastor was talking. He had a cool little phrase for it. And I can't remember the phrase, but the idea basically was that nothing good or of real value really happens in the office if you're a church person. Mm-hmm. And he's like, all the things that really need to be done that matter and that are valuable happen outside the office. So he's like, I don't want to spend all my time in the office. I want to be out where there are people. And that was the idea behind this thing, is that you got to go. It is dangerous, but that's where the people are that need rescued. It's so true. We just kind of, we lobby around, we mill around on this side of the shoal in the church lobby or whatever, and we never get out to where the people who really need rescuing are. And so, really, really good lessons. And so we got 3 more. I don't know if we want to do them tomorrow.
Yeah, let's do that. And while we're wrapping up here, I just kind of want to remind everyone that we've did recently do an evangelism masterclass, and those videos are actually there on YouTube. So if you happen to be watching this, I'm going to put a link at the end if you wanted to go into those masterclasses, or if you can't find them and you're trying to find them, email us at podcast@shepnaz.org, and we'll be sure to reach out to you to get you that information. Also, you can follow everything that's going on with the church by going to shepnaz.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For Pastor Rob, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.